Joel, very momentous day today. A tremendous controversy just before we decided to film this interview. A what was called by Hamas an Israeli attack on a hospital in Gaza was widely reported around the world as that, as if Israel would deliberately attack or even accidentally attack a hospital, killing hundreds. Within moments, every mainstream media outlet picked that up, including Justin Trudeau, who thought before even verification he would immediately opine on the subject. Here's Trudeau making an instant appearance, not even waiting for confirmation. Take a look.
The news coming out of Gaza is horrific and absolutely unacceptable. International humanitarian and international law needs to be respected in this and in all cases. There are rules around wars, and it's not acceptable.
Is the hospital bombing?
Well, within an hour, the facts emerged that it was actually much more likely, given video evidence, a rocket launched by a terrorist group, not Hamas, but the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What an incredible turn of events on the eve of Joe Biden's visit to Israel. Joining us now, again, is Joel Pollak. Joel, what do you make of the whipsaw news and then countervailing facts about this explosion at a major hospital in Gaza?
Well, I'm going to quibble with your choice of the word unexpected or unanticipated or remarkable turn of events. There's nothing remarkable about this. This happens every time Israel is forced to defend itself against these terror organizations. They wait until there's some large number of civilian casualties, and then they cry foul, and they appeal to the world to intervene and to stop Israel from fighting anymore. And this is part of the pattern we've seen going back decades. But the fact is that these rockets fired by Palestinian terror groups often misfire. In the 2021 war, or conflict, you could say, between Israel and Hamas, 20% of the rockets fired by Hamas landed inside the Gaza Strip, did not even hit their Israeli civilian targets, by the way. I should say that all these rockets fired by Palestinian groups are aimed at Israeli civilians. When Israel fires at Palestinian terror groups, they're targeting terrorists, not civilians. But 20% of all the Hamas rockets 2 years ago fell inside the Gaza Strip. And in 2022, when there was another exchange of fire, this time with another group also backed by Iran, but it's called Palestinian Islamic Jihad, 30% of all the Palestinian casualties were caused by misfires, rockets that were aimed at Israeli civilians but hit Palestinians instead. That is the pattern, because they're firing unguided rockets in the general direction of Israel, but they're doing so in a very rushed way. They hide these rockets underneath buildings and in tunnels, and then they bring them out quickly, they fire them, and then they run away again. So this is a very crude way of attacking Israel. Unfortunately, it's been very effective in terrorizing the Israeli population, but it is how the Palestinians operate, and they don't care if they kill their own civilians, because the world has the same knee-jerk reaction that Justin Trudeau did, which is that it must be Israel's fault. Now, there are many who are going to say that even if this is a Palestinian rocket, it's still Israel's fault, because how can you fire at Palestinian targets in highly densely populated civilian areas? Well, first of all, it's a violation of international law for Palestinians to put rockets and to put combatants in densely populated civilian areas. So that's not Israel's fault, and that doesn't stop Israel under international law from going after those legitimate military targets. It just means that Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whoever, those are the responsible ones for the civilian casualties. And then the broader question is really this. If you don't think Israel should be fighting back at all, then what would you suggest Israel do in response to 1,400 murdered Israelis, 4,100 wounded Israelis, 200 hostages taken to Gaza? Are you then saying that there's no way Israel can fight back? Israel is fighting back. It has the right, and as President Joe Biden helpfully pointed out, it has the duty actually to fight back, because there are also international legal obligations that require countries to stop genocide. And it's clear that Hamas is determined on achieving the genocide of Israelis and the genocide of Jews. You can see that from the brutal way that they killed their victims. They didn't just storm a military post, make their point, and go home. They spread out far and wide, and they killed as many civilians, men, women, children, young, old, as they possibly could. They raped women. They tortured their victims. They took people back to Gaza and are now holding them hostage. I mean, this is the kind of violence we haven't seen since the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide. So Israel has a duty, actually, to go after Hamas. And Hamas started this war. They've placed Palestinians at risk in doing so. They knew they would. This is the same pattern, war after war, conflict after conflict. These terrorist organizations, whether Palestinian terrorists or the Lebanese terror group known as Hezbollah, same modus operandi. They basically put their rockets in mosques, next to schools, underneath hospitals. And they hope that if Israel targets their fighters or their terrorists or their weapons and equipment, that they will also hit a number of the civilians that these terrorist groups claim to be representing.
I think it's pretty clear now that it was a rocket. Originally, there was some question, was it a Hamas rocket or a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket? We've seen different video released from the Israeli side, but now also it appears that Al Jazeera was filming the rocket that was launched and that went awry. And then I just saw more footage from a third angle taken from the ground. So I think it's pretty much incontrovertible now, given that you have Israeli sources, Al Jazeera, and other on-the-ground sources. But you had a very interesting tweet. I'm going to read it. And this was before the facts came out. You said, Gaza hospital probabilities, my guesses. And I'm just reading your tweet. You said, Hamas rocket misfire, 60% chance. Hamas deliberate fire, 20% chance. Israel fire nearby hits Hamas weapons at hospital, 15%. Israel misfire, 5%, Israel deliberate fire, 0%. And I don't think anyone could disagree with your stats. Simply put, the reason why this is such news is because if it were true that Israel did this, it would be a failure by Israel militarily. Israel does not target civilians, but it would be such a win for Hamas because it would lower Israel's morality closer to their deliberate attacking of civilians. I just think anyone who thought this was deliberate, I don't think anyone really would. I don't even think the most rabid anti-Semites in the world would think that Israel would do this deliberately. They would probably think, oh, look how sloppy they are, or they shouldn't be doing this. But I just wonder if we're going to get an apology and a retraction from Trudeau and all the others who immediately thought the worst or the second worst of things. What do you think?
Well, the reason that I calculated my probabilities, and it wasn't a very sophisticated calculation, but it's just based on experience, having covered these conflicts and watched these patterns for many years. The reason is that Israel has zero interest in targeting a hospital. We've never seen Israel deliberately target hospitals before. They've certainly had many opportunities. There's good reason for them to want to go after some hospitals if they were inclined to do so, because the Hamas leaders are known to live underneath one of the biggest hospitals in Gaza. I believe it's called Al-Shifa Hospital. If Israel wanted to wipe out the Hamas leadership, they could have done so long ago by targeting that hospital, but they haven't done it. Israel doesn't target hospitals. Hospitals are not legitimate targets, but that's why Hamas hides there, again, in violation of international law. But the number one reason Israel doesn't target hospitals, or wouldn't in this case, is that they know that the international community would be outraged. And that's the only thing that could stand in the way of Israel defeating Hamas. Israel does not want anything to stand in the way of its war effort. It has incredible motivation to get rid of Hamas, and there's incredible internal political pressure from the Israeli public that their government should get rid of this terrorist organization as soon as possible, given the outrageous and atrocious terror attack that Israelis have endured. So there's no reason for Israel to attack the hospital. It would stop the Israeli war potentially, and that's why it's a 0% probability. We've just seen these Palestinian rocket misfires so often, and again, I'm not sure it's a misfire. I mean, I put it at a lower probability that it was deliberately done by Palestinian groups, but it's not beyond them to do it. Remember, these are terrorists who are preventing their own civilians from leaving the war zone. They're perfectly comfortable with their own Palestinian civilians dying. And, they invented suicide bombing practically. I'm aware it started elsewhere in Sri Lanka, but essentially they perfected suicide bombing, and they made it their own. They made it their trademark. And the whole hallmark of suicide bombing is that you're willing to give up your life and the life of Arabs and Muslims around you, as long as you can take out some lives of Jews and Israelis. And by the way, just to that point, there were some 40 or so Arab Muslims in Israel who were killed by these terrorists on October 7th. There were Israeli Arab citizens who were heroes who saved many lives, driving wounded people away from the music festival that was being targeted by Hamas, for example, rescuing the wounded. And some of them paid for that with their lives. There are many stories in the Israeli media about Arabs who sacrificed themselves to save the Jewish Israelis. Paradoxically, this entire conflict since the terror attack has brought Israeli Jews and Arabs closer together. So I think the will to have peace eventually is there, but Hamas and Iran need these confrontations. And Justin Trudeau may think he's earning some kind of politically correct credibility with perhaps left-wing constituencies by coming out and condemning Israel. But all he's doing is making peace more difficult to achieve. You know, George Orwell said in the Second World War, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, he said, in the long run, you do more damage to people not by calling them names and bringing up children to believe lies than you do by bombing them. By bombing your enemy, you're striking against one generation, but by poisoning people's minds with lies and teaching children to hate, you're poisoning generations into the future. And that's what the Palestinian propagandists have done. And that's what, unfortunately, Justin Trudeau is doing when he claims that Israel has bombed a hospital, or he lends any credibility to that before there's been an investigation. I think he's just trying to show that he has some empathy for Palestinian civilian lives. That's not hard to do. The Israeli government is showing empathy. By the way, the most important and most effective thing one could do to save Palestinian civilians would be to get rid of Hamas. Israel did not get rid of Hamas in previous conflicts because of this kind of international pressure, and they lost 1,000+ civilians as a result. They now understand that they have to save their own civilians, and they have to save Palestinian civilians, because Palestinian civilians are killed in this endless effort by Hamas to kill Israelis and the Israeli response to it. If you get rid of Hamas, then you get rid of these attacks. So the most important and best thing in the long run, if you just play the strict crude numbers game, that probably the most effective way to save civilians is just to get rid of the terrorist groups that are sponsoring these wars.